How's it going, everybody? And welcome back to another edition of the Stupid Questions podcast. Today, we're going to be talking with Akande Davis, or FLF, Floodlight Forever. He is a Christian rapper, a friend who I've gotten to know over quite a few years. And we do talk a lot about triathlon on this podcast. Today, we're going to talk a little less about triathlon, a little bit more about music. Akande has a deep relationship with God, and he references it quite often. So it's interesting just to hear his perspective and what he's got going on. Super grateful to him for just being super vulnerable and allowing us to take a peer into his life and his perspective. So without further ado, I want to introduce you to Mr. Akande Davis. Sweet. So where are you at right now?
I'm just in my house, San Diego. That's where
San
we
Diego.
live.
Nice. How long you been in San Diego?
Yeah, so we got here. Yeah, it's been a while, man. It's crazy. When my wife got pregnant in 2017, we moved here, and that's pretty much been it. So like, what is that? Like 8 years, something like that.
Yeah.
7 years. Yeah, it's been a while. It's kind of crazy.
Yeah.
But we love it, man. And you're in is it Tennessee? I could be way wrong.
Yeah, right outside of Chattanooga. So like 25 minutes outside of downtown Chattanooga. You know where Southern Adventist University is. That's where I went. So yeah, my wife and I have been here, but we're actually going to be moving soon. We're going to be flying out to a potential new work location for her. Her potential employer is flying us out to Bend, Oregon to come check it out on the 12th of May. So we'll see how it goes.
That's cool. We have some friends. I mean, kind of friends like Little Light Studios. They're based. I don't know if you've heard of them. They're based out of Chattanooga, I believe, or Ottawa. And we were looking at some properties out there to try and get an investment property.
Okay.
Just because Southern is there. But Ben should be cool, man. I don't know. I know like Pastor Ben is out in Oregon. Benjamin Lundquist, Kevin, a few other people. There's a lot of people out in content creators out in Oregon, though.
Yeah, that's awesome. Do you know Randy Falkenberg by chance?
Randy Falkenberg? I don't think so.
Okay, he lives out there. He's doing some stuff called Common Ground. They do some online content creation stuff, but it's very much focused on like the local area for getting a lot of the outdoorsy people involved in community and stuff like that. So yeah, man.
Sweet.
Yeah. Well, it's Akande first. Like, just want to make sure that I pronounce your name correctly, right?
Yep, you got it.
I've known you long enough. I guess that's kind of a stupid question, but dude, thank you so much for coming on. This is the first episode that it's a little bit different. So the majority of our episodes have been like professional athletes. Some of them have been like business creators of product and services within this space. We did have one other person or two other people who are in the music scene. Nick Goldston, who's a cool guy who had a Grammy that he won through like jazz, from some jazz player. I can't even remember, so that's terrible of me. But so you're the third, but you're the first of your type for like the kind of stuff that you do. Obviously, we'll get into that, the rapping and just your whole story. But yeah, thank you so much for coming on. I'm really excited.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I appreciate you having me, man. I think it's gonna be fun. Looking forward to it.
Have you done any podcasts yet?
You know, I did one a while ago with I did two. One was focused on like music. Another one was focused on digital marketing. But the one I did, oh my goodness, I'm forgetting his name. Ryan something. Slightly Absurd was the podcast, but yeah, this will be like my first one more recently. I used to do them a lot more often.
Yeah, for sure.
And stuff.
Nice, man. Well, the first question I'd love to open up with is an introspective question for you. And the question is, who is Akande?
Yeah, I think a servant of Christ. I think that's really where I want to like have my identity. You know, one of those years ago, I heard like this question. It was like kind of presenting it as when you die, they're going to talk about all of your hobbies and then mention that you were a Christian, you know, and I that really stuck with me because I don't want that to be the case. I want the opposite to be true. So yeah, a servant of Christ, husband, father. I think that's really who I am. And music is a ministry and I enjoy doing it, but it's been a long process for me to understand my identity is not found in it. So yeah, servant of Christ, husband, father, all that stuff.
Yeah, for sure. So where did you grow up as a kid?
Yeah, so my mother worked for the government. So I actually grew up in Germany. I was born in Germany, and I grew up there. Spent a lot of time there between Germany and a small town in Arizona called Sierra Vista. And that's pretty much how I grew up. Small towns, very military focused. I don't know German despite living there, unfortunately. And then small town in Arizona. It's a small town in Arizona. You know, that's how it goes. But yeah, that's
Yeah.
pretty much it.
Yeah. How long were you in Germany, you said?
Shoot. Till I was 7, and then from like 11 or 12 until I was like 16. So
So
I don't
good
know,
amount
something
of
like
time.
10 years. It was a decent
Yeah.
amount of time though. Yeah.
Did you speak German while you were there?
You know, I could understand it for sure,
Yeah.
and I could get around, but like anyone familiar with the military, when you're on a military base, everything is in English, you know? It's kind of like its own English community. And then
Yeah.
you when you leave the base, that's when you speak German and stuff. So I could understand it. I could like navigate, get around, like
Yeah.
order
Yeah.
food, that kind of thing. But it wasn't like I was fluent in German. Definitely not.
Yeah. 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 No, I hear you. Yeah, it's a hard
Yeah.
language too. I love the sound of
Yeah.
it. It's so
Yeah.
aggressive, but pretty cool. So how about siblings? Do you have any siblings?
Yeah, I got a brother and a sister, and then I have some step siblings as well. But they're all older. I'm the youngest in my entire
Oh, really?
family, pretty much. I
Wow.
think I have one cousin that's younger than me, but I'm one of the youngest. My parents are fairly,
Yeah.
fairly advanced for their
Yeah.
Adventist. You know, being Adventist, I don't know. We all live a long time, so
Yeah.
it's
Yeah.
one
For
of those
sure.
things.
So I grew up with some other cousins and stuff like that, but I was always at the older end of it. So growing up on the younger end of, I guess, the family generation, what was that like for you?
Yeah, I mean, being the youngest, even within my own siblings, really meant I was almost kind of like an only child in many ways. Because by the time that I was really doing stuff, like my sister was out of the house and my brother was in high school when I was like in elementary school, so there really wasn't a whole lot of like crossover, if you will.
Sure.
And yeah, even like later years in middle school, high school, when we moved back to Germany, it was just me and my parents. And my brother came to stay with us for like a year or two or something like that. But it was pretty much just me. So it was kind of like growing up like an only child. And definitely a different dynamic. I think even with my children, they're fairly close in age, but our experiences and our time with my daughter, who's the oldest, it's a different experience than my son, who's a little bit younger, and their
Sure.
personalities and everything. But yeah, it definitely felt like I was an only child with some older siblings that I would see once in a while. But I mean, good overall, I think I would say.
Yeah. So it sounds like you moved quite a bit, obviously with the
Yeah.
military family in between the U.S. and then back over in Europe. What are some of the pros and cons that you think that had effect on you as a kid and then growing up?
Yeah, I think when I used to interact with other folks who hadn't moved as much as me or weren't acquainted with like a military experience, it did feel like, and this is on the pro side of things, it did feel like I got to experience a lot more different things than most people, obviously. So like growing up in Germany, you can travel to France or Italy really easily, right? Maybe it's a few hour drive or a short plane flight. And that was really cool. And a lot of like the dynamics that exist around like culture or ethnicity or
Mm-hmm.
race relations or language, like all of those things kind of dissolved on a military base because everybody there is from different walks of life. You'll talk to someone from Atlanta, Philadelphia, California, whatever it might
Mm-hmm.
be. It's very distinct. I think the cons is that when you move a lot, you can't really develop super deep relationships with anybody. So a lot of my good friends, that I've made, we never grew up in the same place. So like once I left Germany, we kept in touch and we were still friends and we still have great relationships, but we weren't in the same place. We didn't experience life in the same way. I would say
Yeah.
that's one drawback. But yeah, generally speaking, I think you get a lot of insight because you're exposed to every culture from all across the world and you guys are unified because you're American and you're in Germany, Like,
Yeah.
I think that's kind of like
Yeah, the
an
expat
easy way to
life.
bring people together, no political divide or
Yeah.
anything like that for sure.
Yeah. So what about schooling? Like, were you homeschooled or did you go to just whatever school was available at the time?
Yeah, I mean, public school in the States for sure, but and then private school later on when I was in high school. But during my time in Germany, it was very similar. Again, like it's its own community. So they had an elementary school, a high school,
Yeah.
middle school, a lot smaller than what we would expect here. And then most kids went to university in the U.S.,
Yeah.
but everything was smaller. So like in the States, when I went to high school at a public school, it was like 3,000 kids, and I
Yeah.
think in Germany it might have been like 800, something like that on the high end. So definitely a different dynamic. But again, that same sort of community aspect where, we're all American, we're in Germany. And
Yeah.
what's interesting, there's lots of communities of US citizens throughout Germany as well. So
Yeah.
like you would meet other folks from other areas as well.
Yeah. So the school then was like primarily filled with expatriates.
Yep.
Like
Yeah.
expats. Okay.
Or currently active enlisted folks. Yeah.
Okay. Interesting. Nice, man. That's really
Yeah.
cool.
Yeah. It's pretty interesting. A lot of it's died now. Like where we used to live is like it's been reclaimed, if you will, by the German economy. So
Oh, really?
nobody lives on the base anymore. I recently saw like some pictures of it, and it's kind of crazy. Like the old commissary and the high school is like overrun with weeds and stuff. It's
Wow.
kind of crazy to see. But yeah.
Yeah, that is wild. Have you been back like in any recent point in time?
No, I mean my wife and I we've been wanting to go to Germany for other reasons,
Sure.
but no, we haven't been back. It's
Yeah.
maybe one day potentially.
Yeah. So who do you think you're more like, your mom or your dad?
Man, that's a good question. I think I'm more. I guess my mom, but probably my dad in a lot of ways that I don't see. It's just definitely a combination. Like my dad is black and my mom is white, so visually I leaned more towards my mom, I think.
Sure.
But I think
Yeah.
personality wise, it's definitely a combination, good and bad traits. But yeah, I wonder what my wife would say. I'm gonna ask her today. Actually, I'm gonna see what she says.
Yeah, go knock on the door, get her in here.
Yeah.
So for your mom and your dad, forgive me for not remembering, were they
Yeah.
both military or just your dad or just your mom?
No, just my mom was a civilian worker for the government, so it's not that she was enlisted or enrolled in the U.S. government or the U.S. military, but rather she was something called like it's like its own whole thing, but a GS employee, which means you're a government employee. You receive a W-2. You're not a contractor, but you work in tandem with the military. So it's kind of like I think her role would be defined as like human resources traditionally.
Okay.
And as you kind of move up the ranks, that's where you kind of will rub shoulders with a lot of military. So pretty much everyone that we lived next to or were around were typically enlisted,
Yeah.
but not everybody was.
Yeah. And then your dad specifically, what did he do in the military?
Oh, he just he was. I think by the time we went to Germany for the second time, I think he was like 55, 56 or something like that. So he'd do like part-time work, different things, but he was more so like a stay-at-home dad, realistically. Yeah.
Okay. Okay. Nice.
Yeah.
So as you were growing up, when did you first come in contact with music and how did it affect your life?
Yeah. I mean, so I think I've always had a passion for music, and I remember seeing like videos of myself as a kid, like interacting with music and different things. So I think there was always kind of a love for it, and naturally, I think kids are incredibly creative. Like they'll draw, they'll color, they'll play, they'll make songs. Like kids are incredibly creative. So I think for me, the most recognizable moment when I really got into like there was two points. So one point, the Prince of Egypt movie had come out, and I had a CD player, and I had the soundtrack for that movie, and I remember just playing that just nonstop. I loved that soundtrack. And then my next kind of like most distinguishable memory is I got this CD by Will Smith called Millennium, and it was rap music, and it was clean, and it was Will Smith, who was an actor I liked. So I was like, okay, this is pretty awesome, and that's kind of I think what jump started me into enjoying hip hop and rap music for in the most truest sense. Like I'm not going to be listening to a lot of the parental advisory explicit content, but Will Smith's album was a nice jumping off point for me. So that's kind of like the first distinguishable memory I have of like buying a CD, listening to it, remembering the songs.
Yeah.
Right before that was that Moses. I'm sure there was something else in between, but
Sure.
Prince of Egypt. That's a great movie, by the way. For anyone who hasn't seen it, definitely
Oh, it
worth
is a great
watching.
movie. Growing up, that was a staple. Like every once a week near Sabbath, Mom would always throw that on. Yep. So
There
you
you
could
go.
quote every lyric and every song.
Same here.
So you mentioned like you wouldn't necessarily go after the parental advisory music. Was that more of influence of your parents, or you just weren't allowed to? Yeah.
100%. We grew up like I had like a video game console, like a PlayStation, and I wasn't allowed to play a T-rated game because I wasn't 13. So they were very, conscious, at least at that point, of what I was listening to and the types of things I was consuming. So yeah, absolutely, it was from them.
Yeah. So as you grew older, when did your parents start to relinquish that, I guess, heavy-handedness of like, you can and cannot do this?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's really when I don't know if there was like a moment in time where it was very formal, but when I got my own computer and I learned how to use like Kazaa and LimeWire, I was pretty much
All
like,
of us.
yeah, you can get all the music that you want, right? And this was like post Napster. So I didn't grow up with Napster, but it was kind of post Napster. And I remember like getting some tracks from Eminem or, you know, a few other artists and really enjoying kind of like the content of it, like the structure of it, you know. And there's certain things, obviously, like even as a kid, I was like, maybe I shouldn't be listening to this because it's kind of extreme. But the cadences and the structure and how the songs were presented and the stories, and really, you know, finding an enjoyment for that. And then kind of being led into other artists based on like producers that I was really liking, and those kinds of things. And I do remember kind of like at a certain point just being able to burn my own CDs and make them. And, you know, as a kid, we kind of grew up with computers, and around that time is when I started recording myself. So it was all kind of the same sort of thing where it was getting familiar enough with a computer to get music and then make my own music, essentially.
Yeah, those are good days, man. I remember having LimeWire and figuring it out for the first time and just downloading gobs and gobs of whatever we could get our hands on, along with probably 500,000 different viruses, destroying so many computers in the making of those CDs and stuff.
1,000%. Yeah, that's funny.
Yeah, it's wild times. It's crazy how long ago that was now. I'm trying to think, like, when did LimeWire quit existing? It's probably when I was in first couple of years of high school, like 2009 maybe.
Yeah, like I had been using like LimeWire, and then like 04, 05 is when torrent really got popular, like BitTorrent.
BitTorrent,
yeah. So being able to have like a torrent file and then remotely access another file, that's when that kind of kicked off. And then at that point, I stopped using LimeWire. So I think like 05, 06 is I know when I transitioned off it, and when I'd come back to the States and I had my own laptop, I was just purely using torrent. So I think that's probably around then.
Yeah. So continuing to kind of grow up in your story here, how did your parents play an influence on what you were to do after high school and you started to kind of form your life? What was that process like for you?
Yeah, I mean, I think there's like this dynamic of growing up with my parents who are like older, a lot older, right, than most of my parents, at least my peers, and then having siblings that were a lot older. And the reason I say that is just because I think I felt very independent a lot of my high school years. Like I kind of just did my own thing in many ways. And, you know, along with having your own computer, having access to like creating your own stuff. So I remember creating music, and my mom in particular was not a fan of it. And she didn't like the lyrics I was using because I was just emulating what I was hearing from these other artists, right? So like certain things and frameworks, I didn't have an understanding of like, you know, what a pimp was, right? I kind of thought like, okay, like a pimp is someone who has a lot of like lady friends, but I didn't really get the actual dynamic of what that was. And that's like one small like glimpse into it. And my mom would be like, what are you talking about? But there was never a point where I got restricted from creating. It was more like, we just don't approve of it. So that to me, I was kind of like, okay, you don't have to approve of it. That's fine. But I remember multiple times like my dad kind of extending a leash for me to try different things and experiment with different things and supporting me in different ways. And one time in particular, I remember wanting to do a mixtape. So like in hip hop, back in the day, you know, around this time, artists and DJs would get a collaboration or a compilation of songs, put it together. A DJ would mix it together, and that would be a mixtape. And a mixtape would be a way for you to expose people to new artists and kind of like showcase yourself as well, right? So I remember getting about 1,000 CDs for like $300 or $400 printed and mailed to me. I did all the cover art myself. I did the mix myself. I did, you know, pretty much everything. I completed this mixtape. And then I remember having to talk my parents into giving me the money to do it. And they gave me the money to do it. And I just went around my high school, the mall, in this small city, in this small town, I should say, and just sold the CDs for $3 each. And I remember just hustling and just selling those CDs. But it was that moment where I was like, okay, they don't really approve of what I'm doing, but maybe there's other things that they support, like this idea of entrepreneurship or this idea of being I don't know, like business savvy or whatever that might be. So there wasn't an element of support. There were just not a whole lot of approval behind what I was actually doing. And I think that kind of led me into content and artists and other rappers that kind of leaned more on the conscious backpack side. You know, like in hip hop, there's always been a distinguishing factor between, it's different now, but there used to be like gangster rap and conscious rap, you know? So it leaned me more towards conscious rap, where I was like, okay, well, I want to say something relevant. I want to say something powerful and impactful, and not just talk about nonsense, you know?
Yeah.
And yeah, that was, sorry. And yeah, that was around that time. So I would probably say that their influence definitely helped steer me towards being mindful about the things I was saying, but also encouraging and empowering me to be kind of entrepreneurial and push forward with something. And I think realistically, they didn't expect for them to make their money back. And I think I ended up making like $500, right? So maybe I just covered the cost of the CDs, but it was really about me just having that experience and having that opportunity to say, okay, I'm going to do this, and I'm putting my mind to it, and I'm going to make this happen. And that really helped me gain a lot of confidence and also overcome a lot of fear. Because it's tough. When you're 15, 16, it's tough to walk up to somebody and be like, hey, I'm selling these CDs, give you my spiel, you know, it's $3. You know, like that's a tough thing to do, for sure. So
do you remember that spiel?
No, I really don't. But I remember I was able to do pretty well. Like in my high school, I would walk around with a CD player, and I would literally have the CD, and I would just let people listen to it. And I'd be like, it's $3. You know, I'm trying to do this music thing. I'm trying to do this rap thing, yada, yada, yada. Yeah. And I remember when I was at the mall, I went and bought like a little stereo system. And I did the same thing with everybody around the stereo. I would go up to tables. I would go up to people. I literally went up to anybody. Yeah. and people who I knew probably would never listen, they bought it. So I was like, okay, go for it. You know, that's.
Yeah. So do you remember more of the rejections or the people when they're like, yeah, I'll buy a CD?
I remember more of the people saying they're going to buy it. Like a few moments really stick out to me. I do remember one rejection. This guy in high school, and you know, a dynamic in a public school, especially a high school, you have like cool kids and you have like the kids, you know what I mean? Like the tastemakers, if you will. So I would just approach anybody. So I didn't really care. But one of the tastemakers said no. He was like, oh, it's cool, but I don't really like that kind of hip hop. And I was like, okay, whatever. And I kept it pushing. And it ended up working out. So
a couple of questions. The first question, what took you to that point to where you decided, okay, we skipped a lot where you're like, you're making the CD. You're obviously producing it. You're putting it all together. So I want to talk a little bit about that, and then I'll ask the next question.
Yeah. So I think, you know, so this is all kind of like culminating around certain things. So like when I started getting my own computer, using LimeWire, and I was making my own music, I just downloaded a free program, and then somebody gave me a pirated version of another program. I was really just getting an opportunity to be creative. And a lot of the music that I made, I thought was terrible. Like I enjoyed it, right? I liked it and I was excited about it, but it was bad. You know, it wasn't good, wasn't recorded well. I couldn't rap really well. And, you know, with that kind of progression, you're like, okay, well, I want to print CDs. How do I do the artwork for the CD? And then that's when I got introduced to Photoshop. So little steps here and there kind of led me into being able to make my own CD covers, being able to download templates online, being able to buy templates for your printer, where you print and it prints on the sticky part, and then you peel that off and put it on the CD. Like all of these little steps that kind of helped me define what that project ended up being in high school. But yeah, it was a lot of tiny steps. I even have one of them. Maybe if we have a moment, I'll try and grab it and show you. But it was just a constant process of me just pretty much being like, I'm going to make as much music as I can, get better and better and better until the point that I feel really good. And around the time when I was in high school selling this CD, this was probably my biggest project, biggest undertaking that I had ever done. And it made me a lot more confident at that time. But it was just small steps on that journey, getting familiar with this program, learning how to record better, learning how to punch in my vocals, learning how to mix, you know, things that I didn't understand what I was doing, but I knew what the purpose of it was, you know?
Yeah, for sure. So you sold those, you got that entrepreneurial experience, because we're talking about two things, entrepreneurship, and then obviously you being a creative, which I wouldn't say is super common in people. Like usually people tend to lean one way or the other. And in addition to you being like a music artist and a rapper, you're also like running your own marketing business. So that genesis that you had there, what was the next step in the path toward, I guess, what you're doing today?
Yeah, I mean, if we were to just summarize from that time until now, there was a lot of really cool, and I look back and I always think about how, because faith is an important part of my life, right? Like the most important part. And I always think about how God was kind of like closing doors and allowing certain things. And I always remembered like these doors would be open. So I got to do some really cool things very young, but they never led anywhere because I was kind of like maybe flippant about it or didn't really pay attention or whatever it might have been. But I would always move high schools. I moved high schools quite a bit. So when I moved high schools, it's kind of like starting over. You'd have to reset this whole process, right? So maybe you're making music, and you're kind of building a little bit of noise where you are. But then if you move, all that momentum kind of disappears. And that's what happened to me a few times. And each time that happened, I would kind of restart and do the same thing wherever I was until I just got better and better and better. And then, awesome. Fast forward a couple of years, the next step was to actually go to a school and try to take this to the next level where I could dive into it as a profession. And that's what led me out to Orlando to go to Full Sail University, which is a creative media school that focuses on recording arts, visual arts, those kinds of things. But that was kind of like the genesis or what led into everything. So it was kind of like this reiterative process. If you're an entrepreneur and you're launching a business, you typically have like an MVP, right? Or you have a rough idea of who your ideal customer persona is, and you take the product to market. If it fails, then you go back to the drawing board. That's what it kind of felt like. But I just kind of had to keep doing that over and over and over. So it was kind of interesting. And one more thing I will say, this was before the internet really took off. A lot of people, this was before SoundCloud and like all of these things were available and streaming, having music on your phone. You had to buy it, put it on your phone. There wasn't, or your iPad or your iPod, excuse me. There wasn't any streaming or going viral or anything like that. I think the first person to ever do it was Soulja Boy. And that was a template that had never been cracked with YouTube, So it's kind of like this weird place to be, but yeah, that would kind of be the whole summary of like that point until what led to me doing this a little bit more seriously.
Yeah, for sure. And so you went to school, and then I guess you were recording and putting out tapes all throughout that experience?
Yeah, so when I was in Orlando, same sort of thing. I had done it multiple times before where I had to restart. So I was like, I'm just going to restart in Orlando. I'm going to do this whole thing over again. So I kind of rebranded myself. I went by a different moniker. And while I was out there, multiple mixtapes, met other people that were in the creative arts field, collaborated with them, did a few music videos here and there, those kinds of things. Did some local events, did some battle rap events that didn't really do anything for me, but just a lot of like, I'm going to hit the ground running, boots on the ground, open mics, coffee shops, wherever I could kind of get in and get an audience, I was there doing that. And that was kind of like my goal for a very, very long time was to do that.
Do you have any memories of just moments when it went really good or really bad?
Yeah, I mean, there was a couple of cool, like really good moments. So, I don't know, like I don't relish in it too much, but I remember having some performances and having people say nice things to me after the performance. And that was cool. Sure. That was kind of exciting, right? Or having like, having people that I considered my peers, like really, give me compliments. And that was really exciting. Yeah. Bad moments. This is the worst, like two blows. Cause around this time is when I really started wrestling with my faith as well to decide like if I'm a believer, if I believe God is real, what is that going to impact in my life? Like, what am I doing about that? Right. Because up until that point I hadn't been, and I was a very, very still, I have to work on this, but very prideful, very arrogant, very selfish. And God was kind of whittling down these things. But I remember two events, probably the most impactful. So big fan of battle rap. And I still watch battle rap from now and then, but there was two events in Orlando. One was a battle rap tournament that was happening in this club that I had been to all the time. I knew all the people doing it. And I even knew the person I was going to be battling. I did the event. My girlfriend, future wife, Tanya, is there. So are my friends. I battled this person. Very clearly, I won. There's no doubt in my mind that I won that. But the judges were kind of biased, and one of them was drunk. So they knew this other guy, and they were like, oh, man, he just tore you up or whatever, right? So I lost that. And, I wouldn't say it was humiliating, but it was definitely like, how did that happen?
Yeah.
And then I went to Miami for another battle rap event about a month later. And at that event, I just I didn't remember all my lyrics. It was a high pressure situation. It was in a club. This person knew had a bunch of people on his side. I got crushed. I just got beat really bad. And I remember it being pretty embarrassing and pretty disheartening. So that was kind of like that second blow to my pride. And I remember thinking like, man, like I am just not as good as I thought I was or that I believed to be. And that was kind of the first sort of, you know, if you think about this idol that I had in my life of myself, it was like the knees got took out, you know? And at that point it was just kind of crumbling down, and God was able to really work on my heart and use me. But those were probably the two most defining moments where it was like, this sucks, but it needed to happen. And if it didn't happen, then I don't know when it would have, honestly.
Yeah, for sure. How old were you at that point?
Maybe I might have been 20 or 21. I think probably 20, actually. Yeah, I think it might have been 20. Yeah.
How old are you now?
33.
33. Okay, nice. You're just a little bit older than me then.
Yeah, so it was 2010. So
okay,
like end of 2010. Yeah, around that time. Yeah.
Yeah. Do you miss doing? I mean, I'm assuming you don't do any more battle rap type stuff, do you?
I don't. I don't miss it. It is incredibly nerve-wracking, and it's one of those things where if you want to be a battle rapper and you want to be really good at it, like that is what you do. You don't really make songs. You don't do all the other stuff. That is your lane. You're a battle rapper because it is incredibly demanding. It's incredibly clever.
Yeah, you gotta be quick.
There are some Christian artists I know who do battle rap, and they're really great at what they do, and they're excellent at what they do. But you have to be just on your game. Like it's a no joke thing. It's kind of like you can't be a plumber and a welder. You know what I mean? Like they're both trades, and they're both in a similar sort of pay range or whatever it might be, but they're totally different trades. So but yeah, I don't miss it at all.
Yeah.
I'd much rather prefer making music and, you know, glorifying God in that way.
Yeah, that's awesome. So your past monikers, your current one is FLF or Floodlight Forever, correct?
Yep.
So what was the creation of that one like, and were your past monikers or just kind of the lifestyles and character traits you took on and shaped and shifted over time, did they kind of inform what FLF would be and become, or was it just a brand new, you decided?
It was kind of a brand new thing. So I used to go by, creating Christian music, I used to go by Davis Absolute. And really that just felt kind of like a random name that sounded cool. And when it came to me, I was like, oh, wow, this is awesome. I love this name, this moniker. I'll kind of go with this. And for a long time, I felt like I built up, again, you know, a much smaller idol, but definitely an idol of myself in that music and in that persona. And people would call me Davis, even though that's my last name, not my first name. And I just remember thinking like, you know, I don't really, at a certain point, I was like, I don't really want to be associated with that anymore. I want to kind of like start fresh and allow God to show this new thing that he's worked in me. And, you know, when I think about it biblically, even now, like every time that God had his people that he had chosen, and when he wanted to work a new thing in them, he would give them a new name. And I'm definitely not saying God gave me this name, but it just felt like the way and the message I wanted to communicate. And it meant something very distinct where Davis Absolute didn't really. But before that, man, just to kind of give you an idea of like arrogance, I had a name prior to Davis Absolute in Florida called Zion the King, which was like, yeah, that was like
a smack in the face of the higher power.
Yeah, and then before that, I don't really remember the names, but Zion the King was really like, it was kind of like I was trying to be deeper and more conscious and like try to tie in like godly aspects in some way, but kind of like, you know, give it over to my own delusion. You know what I mean? So
yeah.
That transition when I stopped doing that was kind of that was like after I got saved, I got rid of that immediately. But yeah, I don't remember the other ones. But yeah, the FLF is really what I think. I can communicate a story, I could tell somebody what it means, and I could witness to people in real time about the meaning behind that name, which is important to me.
Yeah. So do you have like a one-liner that really defines Floodlight Forever? Or,
you know, I think if I think FLF, I'm really trying to think of like the course of history. So the flood at the beginning of Earth's history, the light that came in Christ, and the forever that we have to look forward to. That's kind of the initial premise of it. But there's also kind of like this element of like what we're going to experience. We're intended to be flooding the light of Christ forever, you know? So there's kind of like this name that's assigned to it, and also the history of Earth as we know it. And I really enjoy
that's sweet, man.
reflecting on the flood, reflecting on the light of Christ, and reflecting on the eternity to come.
Yeah, that's really neat. And I can see, I guess I just now noticing the FLF and the sign behind you. That's pretty sick.
Yeah.
That's
Try to
awesome.
do a little bit of branding,
Yeah. So what does music give you that other hobbies and professions can't or cannot?
Music it's just a creative outlet that allows me to, I think more than anything, and you can maybe speak to this yourself, from the stuff that you do, but with creatives, you have like a taste, right? Like you might have really good taste, but you don't have the skills to accomplish what you want. With music, and again, I'm being a little subjective here, but I think I have good taste. And with music, I can accomplish and achieve the goal, the end vision, right? So I might enjoy certain paintings and certain artwork, but I can't really do too much with that. I don't have the skill set for that. But with music, I do, and even content creation more recently. So the fact that I'm able just to execute a vision, communicate a message, take scripture and put it into a way that could be remembered easily, like that's what gets me excited versus any other sort of hobby, right? Where, and not to say that I don't have other hobbies, but specifically music allows me to be able to do that in a way that I think is really well done. Like I think people can listen to it, enjoy it, and share it, and it can be a tool for the gospel in that way.
Yeah, good answer. So we've talked at length about the stuff that you've been doing and how God has been an influence on your life very clearly. And you referenced just a few minutes ago, like, before you were saved. So me and you both grew up in relatively Christian households where those values were kind of set before us. And then I think something that every person goes through, like, we come to a point in our lives when we decide, what do we believe? Why do we believe it? And when are we going to start like acting upon it? So what saved you? Like, what's your story? What's that testimony?
Yeah. So grew up in a more faith-based household, but I don't know if we really, it's kind of like we went by the letter of the law, not the spirit of the law. So I didn't really feel like God's love in the way that I would have expected, or, I didn't understand why we did certain things, and it was never clear to me. And growing up, I didn't really have a firm grasp on the Bible or Bible knowledge or even the stories of the Bible. And I always felt a little self-conscious about that. So I didn't really identify as being a Christian. I just kind of knew that we did these things. This is how we grew up, whatever it might be. I went to a Christian high school for the last couple of years while I was in high school. And that was one experience where I did get baptized, and I really felt the tug of God on my heart. But I think naturally, as most people do, you kind of slip away or slide away from the church. And I definitely did. And the gap between God really grew. When I was in Florida, I really experienced a significant, profound moment with God. And that's when I kind of just dumped out everything. I got rid of all my music stuff. I remember it was like midnight. I gathered up all my CDs that I had printed to sell, all my paraphernalia, all my business cards, and just went out to the dumpster and just threw it away. I remember going online to my web addresses, deleting all my websites, getting rid of everything. I was like, I am done with this. And that was a defining moment. And I never really backslid past that moment, if that makes sense. I never really drifted too far away from that moment because it was so distinct for me. But yeah, multiple times throughout my life, it was kind of these different moments where I would just be called back to God, right? And in Florida, that was a very distinct one for me because it meant a surrendering of this idol that I had had for a long time. And even though I got baptized, I was still making music that wasn't glorifying God. I might have cussed less, I might have not talked about certain topics, but I wasn't glorifying God with my talents, which is really what we're called to do, I think. So that was a pretty defining moment for me from that standpoint, and that's kind of think what pushed me. As far as like what actually happened, I can't even. There was a couple of events that happened that made me really reflect on life, but I remember thinking like, God, why is this not working out the way I want it to? And I just felt like this strong impression of you're not doing it the way I've told you to do it, and you're not trusting in me with this process. And I was like, okay. And then that kind of broke me, and I remember just crying and just being like, wow. And then feeling the love of God immediately after, being like, wow, like all I have to do is trust in God. That's it. I was like, okay, this is not of God. This is not, and I just got rid of everything. I was like, I'm just going to purge it all. And yeah, it was a beautiful moment for sure. And like overnight, it was totally different. Like my roommate at college, my friends, we would smoke a lot of weed, and he was like, oh yeah, we're going to smoke before we go to class. And I'm like, I don't want to. Like I'm born again, man. Like overnight, like, so he wakes up and this totally different person is there, and I'm excited telling him about all this stuff, and he's just confused, but yeah, very significant moment for me as well. Oh, I don't know why. I think I lost you. Hold on, I can't hear you.
Sorry, I hit
Oh,
mute somehow.
no worries.
That was a rookie mistake. Um, so obviously you're going through that and you're changing a lot in your life, and then I would assume there was pressure from friends, and then friends change, and you're finding new groups. Was that difficult for you to kind of find the new normalcy with friends and activities and things like that, or did it come pretty
Yeah,
naturally and you just never look back?
my friends actually were fairly like, they were kind of like, no, I didn't really lose any friends over it, which is kind of
That's awesome.
interesting. So like,
Yeah.
I may be looking now, like currently in my life, and after I left school, like we didn't stay in touch with certain people, right? Like people drifted, which I
Yeah.
think made it easier once you were actually a believer, right? Like people drift a little easier, but nobody ever kind of outright left me alone. I think the one thing I probably will say is that, um, even when I wanted to like have a bad, like even when I was like tempted again to like use drugs or drink or something like that, they were kind of like, "Do you really want to do this?" Like I remember them being like, "Are you sure
Yeah.
about this?" You know, like you had such a you were so professed and now you're kind of like not doing, you know what I mean? So
Yeah.
if
Yeah.
anything, they kind of helped me stay a little bit more in the straight and narrow. But no, I didn't lose any friends over it or anything like that. It was just the challenging part, I think, to me was having to go to school and do this thing and see this thing through that I did not want any part of anymore. So at that point I was kind of like, I don't even want to be around like making music. I was like, I want to go to seminary. Like there was a lot
Mm.
going on in my mind, but I was like, I'm here. I've already spent so much money to be here. Like I have to see this through. And that was probably the toughest part, I think. And
Yeah.
ultimately led to some backsliding and another thing too, there's no handbook on how to be a good Christian outside of the Bible. And if you're not really sticking to his word and allowing his word to refine your character, you can kind of just be a little zealous, you know? And I remember kind of maybe being a little off-putting by my zeal, you know, where I was like preaching fire and brimstones kind of thing. You know what I mean? Around like
Mm.
to a degree to the people around me. So
Yeah.
there was a lot of character formation that I had to go through as well. But yeah, God's good and he's very, very patient. So
Yeah.
praise God that, you know, I've been able to experience that.
Yeah, for sure. How have you experienced God's patience?
Man, just the incredible number of mistakes I've made and the times that he's just allowed me to come back to him over and over. And, you know, I
Mm.
think about like the book of Hosea where God literally instructs Hosea to take a harlot for a wife. And he's using it as an illustration to demonstrate Israel's harlotry to him. And I had a friend, Jared, one time say, like, how many times could your significant other cheat on you and you still take them back? And I'm like, wow, that's
Mm.
a pretty profound idea because God does that for us all the time. So every time that I
Mm.
mess up and backslide and have an issue, I'm always reminded of his patience with me and his continual sort of gentle maneuvering of who I am, replacing that heart of stone with a heart of flesh and writing his laws on my heart and just being reminded of that, you know, like it's a process, right? Like we're being sanctified day by day. And I've just in awe of God's incredible patience as he works with me to become more sanctified.
Yeah, yeah. Great answer. So identity is something that I think it actually does really set you apart as an individual where you have recreated your identity in a number of different periods of your life, just in when we're talking about the monikers, I mean, just from that
Mm-hmm.
portion of your life. But it seems like you've been able to recreate yourself and continue to move forward. Um, for people who don't have that ability, or it's very difficult, for example, they're going into one specific area of schooling, then they get a job, and then they get that job, and they're in 5 years, and they're like, I don't like this at
Mm-hmm.
all, and I got to change and switch, and that causes like a bit of an existential crisis because you're trying to figure out how do I recreate myself and separate from who I am from my identity and how do I
Yeah.
identify myself. So, how would you coach somebody to find those skill sets or the ability to move past from what you were to what you want to become?
Yeah, well, I think you have to start with an identity that's rooted in Christ because if you place your identity in anything other than him, whether it's your career, your achievements or your accomplishments, those things are going to just disappear. You know, if anyone I kind of follow Formula 1. I'm not like the most avid fan of it,
Oh,
but
I
like
love
I
F1.
look at some of the records that were set by these previous people and then and my wife is like, you know, they've won so many times. Why do they still keep wanting to win? And I'm like, they just want to define their legacy. And realistically, it's just vanity, right? Like someone else is going to come and pass their record and blow up their record, and their
Mm-hmm.
names are going to drift into the history books
Yeah.
far when all this is gone, right? And so even the most accomplished, most successful, most admired people in the history of the world are lacking if their identity is not in Christ. So we are much more ill-defined if we think that our achievements or our career can define us. if you're ever looking to change something like a career, then you just keep in mind, this is just a career. This is not who I am or what I am or who I should be. And I think that gives you a lot of freedom. I feel like I'm kind of in a unique spot because I've had to rebrand so many times. And even in my career, coming out of school, I was really in the creative media field, and I rebranded into like marketing and marketing operations. So it's a totally different thing from that standpoint as well. But I would probably say exactly that. Like, if your identity is rooted in Christ, your career, what you do, what your accomplishments, none of that is going to help change how God sees you, right? And if I would just take it a step further, you just start out, you're a sinner that's been forgiven and you have grace through Christ. So if you start like I'm nothing and God still cares about me and I have identity in Christ and I can sit on him with the throne when he comes again, I think that's a pretty powerful moment, right? To acknowledge like what your significance is in the course of eternity. So that's how I would kind of frame it. It's easier said than done, of course. And naturally, like, everyone's going to have some level of identity in their career. And if you get fired or if you get into something that prevents you from being able to do it, it hurts, but you just have to lean into Christ and trust on him.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, great stuff. So with your current, I guess, profession, you're making music, you have a marketing company that you're running, and then you're also kind of in lieu with the music and stuff, you're doing content creation around kind of, I don't know, what do you call this? Like exposing the darkness behind a lot of like popular culture, music and media and things like that. How did you get into that aspect of this content creation? Because it definitely does intertwine with what you do.
Yeah, it's interesting. So when I was at school at Full Sail, and again, just like tying a little bit of my testimony, I used to be like really heavy weed smoker. I'd smoke weed like all the time. And my friends and I, we would like, you know, dive into like these deep conspiracies, right? Like Illuminati. All this stuff was like very, very like, I don't want to say frowned upon, but it was very like on the down low, if you will. Like nobody really knew about it. And when you would tell someone, they'd be like, what does that mean, right? And this was like 2011, 2010. And with that context in mind, like today, it's very normalized. People talk about it all the time. But back then, I remember feeling like, wow, like this knowledge is being exposed to me. And I was like, whoa, like if all this stuff is happening, then God must be real, right? And I remember just thinking like, what is this all about? And like, just kind of absorbing it all. Anyways, that's all to say, I got really paranoid and like freaked out, found Christ, got my peace, was able to restore it. But now, like, which I thank God for, I'm able to see some of these things that are happening in popular media and call it out because I've seen it before. It's the same playbook, same template. And we know that there's a controversy between good and evil happening all around us spiritually. So when I started making music, I'm like, okay, I'm making music. And then I see a lot of people talking about things that I don't entirely agree with or exposing things, but never pointing back to Christ. And I was like, you know what? I should offer a different perspective on how does this tie in with the Bible? How does this tie in with what we're seeing? Why should people be wary of it? Because we have more, I think, now than ever before, people listening to evil, demonic music, not being aware of it, and ingesting it. And music is more ubiquitous than ever. So if you have a cell phone, you could stream a song, whether it's on YouTube or SoundCloud or Spotify or Apple Music or whatever other platform that might exist. Music is ubiquitous. Before, you'd have to go and buy a CD. And, you know, if you try to buy a CD with a parental advisory sticker, maybe you get turned away. But now it's not like that at all. If you have an account, you could pretty much have free reign, right? So, so when I see younger kids kind of coming in and making their identity these artists or like this music or whatever it might be, I try to offer a different perspective to help kind of shape the narrative that people are experiencing on a daily basis. So, and I think the first video I ever did was like at the beginning of 2021 or something like that. And it was really more so for me just to kind of call out this artist who had put out this content that was purely blasphemous. And it got a little traction. I was like, you know what? I'm going to make some more of these videos. And I started making some more. And lo and behold, you know, a couple of videos kind of did well. And I was like, you know what? I'm going to tie this into what I've been doing musically as well. And it's been a really big blessing.
Yeah, that's really amazing. So where would you like to be in 5 years? Because you're like you said, marketing business, you're doing this music stuff. You're split up in a couple of different areas.
Yeah.
Is that the way you want to always have it? Or do you want to get hyper focused on one of these?
You know, I've kind of been in this place where I want to surrender my plans to God, and I don't know what those plans are. In 5 years, I'm going to be exactly where God needs me to be. But my goal is to continue to do this ministry, continue to work my job, and whatever doors that are opening and God wills it and leads it there and is able to, and no matter what happens, I can take care of my family and my children. That's all I really want to do, man. And I think one thing I've been wrestling with, and I think a lot of people experience this, is just contentment. Being content with where I'm at right now, my career, in my life, in my finances, not chasing after the shiny object. And sometimes that shiny object can be a noble shiny object. So, you might feel like, oh, God is calling me to do this thing, this ministry full time. And realistically, he probably isn't, right? I think that calling is going to be super transparent. It's going to be apparent to not only you, but your spouse and everyone else in your life. It's not going to be something where I have to twist anybody's arm to achieve it. So I'm just like looking at God and saying, hey, God, I'm going to trust in you. I'm going to do what I need to do right now. And I'm going to focus on the work at hand and then let you provide the growth and water that seed, So that's kind of where I'm at. In 5 years, I'll be where God needs me to be. That's probably my big takeaway.
So I'm just curious. I was thinking about this with the whole thought of contentment. So you subscribe to the idea and the belief like that you should be content in whatever you're doing and find peace in that. And I would say that that's like I'm relatively the same. But I'm thinking like on a spiritual aspect, when you're thinking about growing, I would say they would be probably, to me, it sounds like, I shouldn't be content with where I am right now in that relationship, but maybe I should. What do you think?
Yeah, when I more so think of my feeling of joy or fulfillment or spiritual connectedness to God being tied to anything that I'm putting my hand towards. So if I start, which has happened to me before, the reason I'm saying this because I've experienced it, if I start feeling like God is not really blessing what I'm doing because I don't see the numbers that I'd like to see, or I don't see the results that I'd like to see when I release a song, or I don't have as many people excited about the music that I'm releasing as other people, that's where that kind of comes into mind. So I'm always striving to create better content, to do things better, to take advice and implement it into what I'm doing, or if someone comes with a new idea for a song that I've never done before, being open to that, not saying, oh, no, I like the way I've been doing it, but more so when the results come from that effort, that it's not up to me to scrutinize if the results are good or bad, but rather just to be faithful in the actual process of it. So I think contentment's a little bit different. I think God's called us to be excellent and to do things that are excellent and to strive towards excellent in all that we do because we're going to be a reflection of him. But it would be, I think, incorrect for a believer to say, you know what, God doesn't want me doing this because I didn't hit 100,000 views on this video, which is something that I felt, I've been like, man, I should just stop doing this. Like, who am I really impacting? And then every once in a while I'll get a message and it'll be like something that's very encouraging and a good reminder as to who God is reaching that I'm not aware of.
Yeah. Yeah, it's super interesting. I think of kind of the example, a lot of the times what I've experienced is that the things that have most impacted me are typically like the little things in passing that people have said or things that they have done that just like for whatever reason in that moment planted a seed and like really hit home for me. And then I've even gone back to those people, several of them later in life and be like, hey, thank you so much for this, instance. Yeah. And then they have no recollection or remembrance of it. So I think that in today's world of, social media, I mean, if you have 6 views, one of those views could have been something that like radically changed someone's life or perspective on a certain situation that has a stepping stone to something else. So I think we're all making impacts and influencing regardless of our numbers. Yeah,
and like the widow with the mites, for example. So Jesus called out this widow that gave 2 mites, right? I forget who spoke about this, but a pastor really said this, it hit home. She gave all that she had, which was her being faithful, and I would say being content, right? Like, this is what I can give, this is what I'm able to give, and this is what I'm going to give. Now, those 2 mites in that moment probably didn't amount to very much in her local church, but the pastor pointed out that the story of her willingness to give and the fact that Jesus highlighted has led to probably billions of dollars in funded projects and charitable work as a result of just those 2 mites, So imagine if she was scrutinizing her work saying, you know what, no one can really do anything with these 2 mites. I'm not really going to worry about it. But instead she was faithful, and those 2 mites that she gave, which probably didn't have a significant impact in that moment, yielded results that I'm sure she couldn't fathom, right? So I'm always reminded of like, okay, I'm going to give my 2 mites and whatever God does with that.
It can make a difference.
Yeah.
100%, man. So where can people find your stuff?
Yeah, absolutely. So on Instagram and TikTok, it's Floodlight Forever. If you want to search my handle on Twitter, or X, which I'm not really on too much, it's FLF, and Facebook as well. But YouTube is a big one, FLF, Floodlight Forever as well. Yeah, I'm all over everywhere, all the places that you would expect.
Yeah. We'll link it in the show
I feel like I'm
sure.
pretty accessible as well. So definitely open to hearing people and communicating with people and learning more about everyone's unique story.
Yeah, for sure. So in my final question then for you, what advice would you give to someone who wants to follow a similar path into music production and content creation?
I would say it is easy to get lost in the sauce. You can easily become obsessed with the product that you're creating. You can easily become obsessed with the vibe of the people or the relationships or the network. I would say if anything that you do, yield it to God unconsequentially and just say, Lord, whatever you're going to do with this, do it and refine my heart to be postured towards you. Because the one thing I have fallen victim to is, you create these idols, you create these feelings, you create this relationship with your peers that is really not of God in many cases because, realistically, it's a competitive environment when you're making music or even if you're collaborating on music. So I would say just have your heart postured towards God, make sure that you're doing the best that you possibly can with the product that you can. And keep in mind that, whether God uses you to reach 1 million people or reach 10 people, be reminded of why you're doing it, right? Because if you're doing it for his glory, none of that matters and he'll take care of the rest. So that's what my advice would be.
Yeah, good stuff. Well, thank you so much.
I appreciate you having me
on, Seth. For letting me dive in, and get to know you a little bit more. We'll have to do it again in the future, maybe dive into some deeper stuff with the music. But I really appreciate you laying out your story and giving us some of your perspective.
Thank you, man, for having me on. It's a lot of fun, brother. Appreciate you, man.
Thank you so much to Akande for coming on today's episode and sharing a bit about his life and giving the perspectives that he holds. It was really enjoyable. I love music. I love the stuff that he's been putting out, so I'll make sure to check that out in the show notes and link those things so you can go follow him and see what he is all about. If you made it to this point in the episode, just want to say thank you so much for commenting, subscribing, liking, sharing, doing anything you can to review the podcast and share it with your friends and family. Really does help us to continue to grow in this space. So thank you so much for that. If you want to sign up for our newsletter, you can do that at the stupidquestions.show website. There's a link at the top of the website that says newsletter or sign up for newsletter, and you can do that there. And for the last thing I want to leave you with is a little bit of wordage from Mr. Akande Davis in asking the question to yourself, what are you doing and why are you doing it? Thank you so much. We'll catch you in the next one.